Elementary question. Are there typical life events that go with those 3 rounds of funding? Because I think the rational question is, I need money, and they go, why?
Yes.
And I'm betting there's generally...
So there are different stages of risk that we talk about when we're looking at a company. So the sort of first stage of risk is the sort of product risk. Okay? Can we in fact build this product? Will it work? Just functionally, right? So that's typically your seed stage. Is you're funding to get a product to some level where it can support some degree of reasonable commercial traction, right?
So you had a minimum viable.
Yeah.
And they're saying, great, get it almost productized.
No,
Almost
before
productized.
the minimum viable.
Yeah, so minimum viable, so minimum viable product is like, we got something that so people can see, maybe some people are sort of kind of using it. That's usually self-funding and friends and family. Okay, seed funding is like, okay, great, I see what you're trying to build, but you know, you really need to flesh it out a little bit more. It's only 80% functional, get it to sort of 100% functional. Now, you're never at 100% functional, but you know, there's usually a set of features that kind of define. Minimum viable product means you've proven that, you know, like you can get this thing to kind of work. Minimum commercially viable product, that's more like your seed funding, where like, you know, at the minimum viable product, we have one person who's like sort of used it, but we're missing all the reporting, and we don't have, you know, anyone to bill for it, and you know, it actually can only have one user on the system at a time, and then it crashes. So your seed funding is going to be like, get it to the point where you could actually have 10 concurrent users, and there's a basic amount of reporting, and people would actually potentially pay for it at that point, right?
Yep.
So that's kind of like your product risk. And then from there, you have your market risk, right? Which is, you know, okay, like now we've proven it's out there, but like we need to actually, are people willing to spend money on it? Like, can we get it out to the market? How do we distribute it? Can we deploy it, right? And so addressing that problem, usually that's going to go with kind of like your you know, sort of your Series A, where like now you're actually kind of going out, you're taking a stab at pricing, you're trying to figure out what people will pay for, you're trying to figure out like, you know, can we get enough customers on to where it's actually interesting and it's growing. And then the final stage is financial risk. So now you've got a product, people are using it, you've proven that there is a demand for it, but have you really stabilized your financial model? Like, can you sell it at a level that will scale to where you can be profitable, right? So let me give you an example. Like, so you build a SaaS product to solve a problem, right? At first, you're saying, just, can we even build a product to solve this problem? Okay, so now you've proven that you've solved the core fundamental problem. But now, in order to actually make it usable to people commercially, you need to add some basic things, reporting, security, etc. So that's now we've got a point where like people can actually use it in a commercial environment. So now you've test marketed, and now you're at the marketing. So like now you're going to take it and get it into the hands of a large enough pool of people to where you can say there is a demand for this. But let's say you go to market and you're charging $100 a month, right? Well, the problem is you get to a point where you still have financial risk because you only have like 20 customers at $100 a month, and you either need to sell 20,000 of these things, or you need to get these people to pay $10,000 a month, right? So you're still figuring that out. Whereas in the financial risk and moving beyond that, that's where like you know for a fact that they will pay this much money, you know you can scale it, you know you can support it, and at that level, you're now beyond the financial risk. Everything that's going in is straight growth, because you've also at that stage sort of solidified your sales process, your customer support process. Like you have a real company, and you now know that if you spend $1.50 on sales and marketing, you're going to get $2.50 back. And so you're raising at that B level now to straight up pump money into that engine and crank out the growth that she's worried about having. Does that all make sense? So those are the, broadly speaking, the kind of tiers that Yeah, Ronald.
Yeah, briefly, you started to talk about having an odd number on your board, and I think it's, I think you were going to expand on that and probably work through this.
Yeah, so there's a young lady who I won't name her name or her company, but she was raising some money. She found an angel investor who was going to provide her with the seed round of funding. Long story short, the guy raised several red flags for me. I told her, don't raise this, do not take this money at all, if you can at all help it. I've never felt so strongly about something in my life. You will regret this from day one. She had no choice. She took the money and she regretted it from day one. Part of the problem that she had, and there's many, many problems, but basically he came on board with this money and she now had a two-person board. So anything where it was deadlocked, he could kind of overrule her because he'd worked those things in. So, you know, it became very clear, or this, I don't want to say, his actions would seem to indicate to me that he was basically sort of trying to take her property. He actually started up a separate company, and he was doing, I mean, I've never seen someone try to kill a company faster, where it seemed like he just wanted to sort of take it over, kill the company, take the IP, and then take a company that he owns, kind of clean slate, and go market the IP someplace else. So, you know, I mean, she's involved in litigation. It's a nightmare. So with a three-person board, then, you know, if you find yourself in a position where you don't have the luxury of saying, I'm the chair and I can overrule everyone, you generally can sort of, you know, have a majority rules for certain types of things. And, you know, usually what would happen is, like, if you have an angel investor, you might get the one guy is another board member, you as the founder, you're a board member, you add a third person who's an independent. Usually that independent will have some stake in it, so they'll put some money in. Or if you're asking a lot for them and of their time and maybe their reputation, maybe you give them some equity. They usually have some skin in the game. The idea is that even if you and the investor disagree, you've got a third party where you could have a discussion, and then you have a tiebreaker. So it sort of minimizes the risk to you as a founder that things aren't going to go in your way. And so that would be at the seed stage. Would be a three-person board. A round, you typically get a five-person board. You know, you want to try to avoid larger than five, but it's not atypical to add, you know, two more board members have a seven-person board at a B round. Yeah.
When you're pitching, my partner's under my age, and I keep reading articles where even though 40% of all the most successful companies are by people 40 and up,
Yep.
that they keep talking about age as being a discriminating factor in a pitch. How do you feel about that? Should he be the one pitching and I should be sitting on the side, or
I don't subscribe to that, but I think that raising money is its own type of sales process, right? It's straight up, like you have prospects and you have to follow up with them, and you have to segment them, and you have to send them marketing material, and right, you have to do demos and pitches. It is literally its own specialized form of sales. So I'm going to just challenge you and say, which of you is the better sales guy? If it's him, make him the pitch guy, right? But if he may be younger, but if he can't get up and do what I'm doing and have these conversations and, you know, charm you and whatever, then no, it should be you. It's a sales process, and the best salesperson should be the pitch person. You know, there are other separate discussions, which is which one of you should be the CEO, right, versus the CMO, and kind of who should do the, you know, those are different discussions, right? Not everyone is equipped to be a CEO. You may go through this whole Founders Institute thing and come out on the other side and say, this has been really helpful, I'm going to be a founder, but your title may not be CEO. And the best founders are the ones that know their strengths and know, like, I can be a CEO, or I need to be the CTO, and I need to hire someone who knows operations and knows all this other stuff related to it, or who can manage investor relations, or who can be the front-facing person to do the pitches. You know, so part of your burden as a founder is to be able to be, you know, honest in your own evaluation of self as to whether or not you can do these things.
Okay, thanks.
Speak on which, like, does the Founder Institute help you figure out which role you're most suitable for?
I would say in a general sense, yeah.
So she asked, just so you guys, you can't have possibly heard it. She asked, will the Founder Institute help you to identify which role you're best suited for?
Yeah, so when we go over co-founders, where we're looking for complementary skills to build a team, a lot of that will get flushed out. And, self-assessments are important. Again, you probably don't know what you don't know yet. Certainly at the end of 3.5 months, you're gonna know a lot more, maybe not everything, but a lot more about yourself and what it takes to run a company, which means all the skill sets that you need to be successful. So, in a general sense, the answer is clearly it'll help you.
So we are coming up at 9:30. How about we do 2 more questions? Yes.
So get in there. So
Yeah.
options pool,
Yeah.
when, how much? Is that?
Excellent
seed
question.
funding or-
Yeah, all right, so in hindsight, I probably raised money the wrong way. I set up an LLC, I didn't get investors involved, I sort of didn't know, and I brought some money in from employees, and I just kind of arbitrarily set a value and, said you get a percentage point because it was an LLC, so you get a percentage ownership for every X, Y dollars you put in, and create some complications later. You can have an option pool in an LLC. It's really sort of a phantom option pool. You have to get an attorney involved in terms of how you structure all of these things and whatnot. The real sort of key is, when do you expect to be aggressively recruited? That's when you should have the option pool. Now, as a founder, you're going to go out there with your own money, and it's you and maybe one other person. And at that point, you're going to have to, you may not want to create a value for the company in terms of a dollar amount, but you're going to have to partition the company up based on your sort of pro rata skills, who came up with the idea, who's going to be doing the work, that sort of thing. To get those initial people on, if you cannot in fact pay the market rates. So your initial pool of 2, 3, 4, 5 people that you may bring on, you're just going to give them straight equity in your company, assuming the value is non-existent or nearly non-existent. Or you may create some sort of artificial value because you'll say, as the founder, I've also put in $50,000 cash, plus I spent a year of my life and I make $100 grand a year, so you can do that kind of fuzzy math, but it's still a discussion, right? So you'll do that as a founder. You'll then raise your convertible debt. You're not necessarily going to hire people where, the key question is, if you raise money and it's convertible, do you expect to hire where you're going to have to pay under market rates such that you will have to give people potential, equity? Because you're still going to be an LLC probably at that point. And, there are ways to do things like, warrants, or you can do a sort of a phantom option, where they can get a percentage at the next round. So you can structure that stuff. But the formal pool itself will likely only be established when you go and you actually raise that first priced round, which is likely going to be your A round. Now, one thing to keep in mind when talking about valuation is that, the investors are always going to negotiate in their favor. And I say that with all due respect to my investors. It's just a fact of life, right? So, they may come in and say, look, we're going to give you 2 on 4. So we're going to give you $2 million on a $4 million valuation. And you're going to come back and you're going to say, okay, great. And then when you get your term sheet, in the term sheet, they're going to say, you're going to allocate a 20% option pool, pre-money. Okay? So when you do the math on all this, and you have to create something called the cap table, which shows how everything's going to be formed and who has whatever ownership interest. But you realize, if you have not yet provisioned out a 20% option pool, that's got to come out of your owner's shares. So let's say that you own 80%, your co-founder owns 20%. You're telling the client, you're telling the investor, you're agreeing you're worth $4 million. But they've now said, well, you guys have to pre-money carve out 20% for the option pool. You're diluting yourselves before you've even brought any money in. Okay? So, and if they say it needs to be post-money 20% pool that's carved out pre-money, it actually needs to be, you got to carve out more like 24% or whatever, because you got, then the pool itself, just like you individually, will then get diluted by the new money coming in. So your effective pre-money valuation is not in fact 4 million. It's like 3.2 million. Because you had to carve out all this money and get diluted down. Take my word for it, when you see this on the spreadsheet, you'll just be like, what just happened, right? Like, but it's very common to have this happen to you, right? So you want to then argue, like, oh, host money. We all dilute. We'll carve out the pool after the fact. So then that way your value is really 4.
One final one. 3-year bet, investing 4 years? What would you?
Standard is 3 to 4 years. Ours is 4 years. There are variations on it. You normally have a cliff, right? So we do a 4-year vesting schedule with a cliff, annual cliff. So like you only fully vest the 25% per year if you are there for the entire year. So if you leave or you are terminated in November or December, 28th, you don't get 25%. This is, again, and now this is where as the CEO or your board, you set the option pool.
So you lose out that whole year because you didn't finish the full year.
Correct. Where versus a pro rata, which is more employee friendly. I told you I'm a programmer by heart. I'm a jerk. I'm just kidding. So, there are reasons to do it. There are reasons why you do it. But you discuss that with your attorney and you structure it the way it makes sense. That's what we did. Yes. Last question.
Really appreciate hearing everything. On one hand, I hear you had everything going for you, right? You had the industry knowledge, you've been in the industry for a while, you know people, you understand what you're doing, you know how to do it. And on the other hand, I'm hearing the mistakes and the trouble and the problem. What is the thing you would tell yourself to do differently next time? Like, what was it you did, like, you didn't know what you didn't know when you were going through it, but on one hand, like, man, he had all this going for him. He still had these mistakes or problems or struggles.
So in hindsight, I don't know how much I could actually have done differently because there were a lot of environmental factors, right? I mean, you got to think like the market had crashed, worst market ever to raise money in, right? Then, who could have anticipated my investor would have taken such a beating in this other investment? You look at those things and you say, like, there were a lot of things that just were sort of out of my control. Having said that, there are definitely times where I feel like in hindsight, maybe I should have recognized certain problems faster and acted more decisively. So I would just sort of say, like, if you need to be very aware. The other thing is that, if you're not naturally a numbers guy, you need to become one. Because, you need to know how to manage cash flow, and you need to constantly be asking yourself, like, well, what happens if I run out of money? And when am I going to run out of money? Right? And you need to have plans upon plans to deal with those scenarios. Right? I was very lucky that, like, a combination of luck and some other things, but that when I needed it, I was able to move things forward and deal with some of these financials. But that's where I've been fortunate to be somewhat uniquely positioned. The average person is not. And so the one thing that I would say that I do differently is, be more aware of the numbers, throughout the process. And if you're not that guy, then bring somebody in right away who's going to be on top of it for you. Act decisively. Like, if you know you have a bad hire, if you know that the market's not responding the way you expected, change. Do something different. Don't just keep doing it for 2 more months thinking it's going to get better when every day the cash reserves dwindle, right? Or the window of opportunity narrows. So, I would just say, I personally, have learned, I don't like to fire people, right? Those are not, that's the hardest thing for me, but you got it. If you've got a bad fit and they're not providing value, that's the one thing is you need to be brutal in your assessments of these things. because you don't have the luxury of time. You don't have the luxury of cash, right? So someone who may be a B player, I'm sorry, you don't have time to have B players on your team. So that may go contra to your personality, but you know, it's your money, it's your time, it's your life. So I was too nice in many instances. I didn't act decisively. I didn't let the right people go when they needed to be let go. Maybe didn't shift. So I just would want to be more, make sure that So I do take my learned behavior that I hope I'm applying today and what I'm doing now. Make sure I'm consistent with my next venture. All right. All right, guys.
If you have more questions, just email us and we'll get them to Brian. Thank you.